From A&E, this is Biography.
He created a role that terrified America and then haunted him for the rest of his career. Whatever else he did, Anthony Perkins was mostly remembered for his role in Psycho. When the Hitchcock classic was recently remade, actor Vince Vaughn faced an impossible task, playing the role defined by Perkins 4 decades earlier. In his personal life, Anthony Perkins was nearly as distressed as the characters he played. He lived a double existence, constantly fearing his public image as husband and father would be exposed as a sham. He also endured the horror of learning that he had AIDS by reading about it in a supermarket tabloid. But Anthony Perkins was blessed with a gift. He could take his private fears and put them on the screen for the rest of us to see and feel.
He is one of the most vivid characters in our cinematic heritage. The shy, sinister Norman Bates. Anthony Perkins, the actor who portrayed him, was often confused with that creepy, neurotic loner.
He was Norman Bates, and I don't think the public allowed him to be anything else but. I really do feel that.
There were indeed some parallels between the actor and the character. But there was more to Tony Perkins than Psycho suggested.
Yeah, I think he was the most tormented person about his sexuality I've ever known.
You know, this is the men's locker room.
He was amazingly funny. I mean, his wit was so fast.
He was a multi-talented personality, starring in film and on Broadway, but he never achieved the kind of stardom he had hoped for.
He emanated a touch of weirdness, and I think for a generalized audience, which makes the movie stars slightly off-putting.
I mean, I don't know another actor exactly like him or that makes you think of him. Unique. Quite unique.
Anthony Perkins was probably destined to be an actor. His father, Osgood Perkins, was a celebrated actor in the 1920s and 30s. Director Elia Kazan said he was the definition of the word professional. Osgood originated the leading role in the Broadway hit The Front Page, and he co-starred in the classic 1932 gangster film Scarface. Osgood's wife, Janet, known as Jane, was a Wellesley graduate who handled all of her husband's finances. Their only son, Anthony, was born April 4th, 1932. They were a tight-knit family, despite Osgood's frequent travels to appear in plays or movies. In 1937, at the age of 45, Osgood Perkins died of a heart attack during an out-of-town tryout for his latest play. His son was 5 years old.
I remember that it was a terrible shock when he died, because he died suddenly and totally unexpectedly. And I remember that, gradually there was a big change in Jane's life and in Tony's life because of that.
A few years after Osgood's death, Jane met a writer named Michaela O'Hara. The two women lived together for the next 30 years.
My mother said, I don't know whether she used the word lesbian, but but that was just to me. Oh, she's there having a lesbian relationship, or there, something like that.
Remember, his father died when he was very young, and he grew up as a young boy with older women. That's what he was used to. That's what he thought life was, because he didn't have that father figure. And yet that father's figure loomed over him because he chose to be an actor, and his father, everyone adored his father.
Even as a child, Tony displayed a mischievous sense of humor, but he often felt isolated. He was not good at sports, and he had few friends his own age. he did take pleasure in daydreaming about his father's life as an actor.
I embraced acting as a profession because he had a lot of scripts left over in our apartment when I was growing up, when I was 10, 11, and 12, and I would read these scripts and read the dialogue out loud, and it didn't seem that difficult to make sense out of spoken dialogue. It seemed you could read both parts, or either part, or one part instead of another.
Tony began acting in summer stock productions while he was still a teenager. When he was 17, he met another young actress who would become a lifelong friend.
And then he had this wonderful way of moving, almost like an animal with these long arms and long legs and an almost loping walk sometimes. And his head, the way he held his head, all those things. I thought he'll be a wonderful actor. He was beautiful to look at, and gentle, and funny. And at 17, that's wonderful.
In 1950, Tony enrolled at Rollins College in Florida, where he earned raves for his performances in a number of productions. During the summer after his sophomore year, Perkins hitchhiked to California, determined to land a part in a major motion picture. Remarkably, he persuaded MGM to test him for the role of the young suitor in The Actress. He won the part and took a break from college to make his screen debut opposite Gene Simmons and Spencer Tracy.
That was the first time I said, "You want to be an actor, don't you?" "Oh, yes, he really wants to be." He wanted to be not just an actor, he wanted to be a movie star.
Unfortunately, The Actress bombed at the box office. Tony returned to Florida. At Rollins College, Perkins had homosexual experiences, but a school scandal that resulted in the expulsion of several gay students reminded him of the perils of engaging in homosexual activity. 1950s America demanded a life of concealment.
There was something wrong. You met in dark places. You met in dark bars. There was always the danger of a police raid in the bar. There was always the danger you would be put in prison and found out. So it's a very frightening time for many gay men.
After leaving school, Tony moved to New York and got his first big break when he replaced his childhood friend John Carr in the Broadway smash Teen Sympathy. It was a groundbreaking story for the era. Tony played a sexually confused young man, branded as a sissy by the boys at his boarding school.
I only know there was a quality in him that just came through that Johnny Carr didn't have. That turmoil, that cauldron, that bubbling inside. What's wrong with me? What he maybe couldn't think, maybe didn't know what it was yet, but it was there. It was there.
The Tony I knew, I don't think ever had 5 calm minutes a day. He was wired very tightly. He always reminded me of a doe about to bolt. You know, those young animals, their hide ripples with nerves and anxiety. He was like that.
Tony hid his private life from most of his collaborators, but he could not keep it entirely secret. After the theater one night, John Carr saw him walking with another friend of his whom he knew to be gay.
And they were, I don't know, holding hands. I mean, they were physically in a posture that it was unmistakable. And then I realized, I think that was the first time I really thought, oh.
3 years after the failure of his first movie, Anthony Perkins had a far more lucky break. Oscar-winning director William Wyler was looking for fresh young actors to star opposite Gary Cooper and Dorothy McGuire in his new film, Friendly Persuasion, the story of a Quaker family during the Civil War. Wyler's assistant saw Tony in Teen Sympathy and recommended him to the director. At the audition, Wyler was captivated. He immediately signed Tony to play Gary Cooper's son.
I don't want to die. I don't know if I could kill anyone if I tried. But I have to try so long as other people have to.
When I saw Friendly Persuasion, I thought, well, here's the next major American lanky hero. casting him alongside of Gary Cooper was just a brilliant idea, because they really did seem related and did seem to be part of the same culture.
Friendly persuasion turned Tony into a Hollywood star and put increasing pressure on him to conceal his private life. Everyone who saw Anthony Perkins in Friendly Persuasion recognized his unmistakable charisma.
It's a seductiveness, and that's what movie actors have. All the really successful ones. Something that says to the audience from the screen, watch me, it will please you, it will be wonderful. And he had it.
For his mixture of comic gawkiness and emotional intensity, Tony Perkins received an Academy Award nomination. He was a hot commodity. Paramount signed the young actor and trumpeted his first starring role in Fear Strikes Out.
What is there about Tony Perkins that made the young people of America acclaim him as their star of the future? Something half hidden behind his eyes, something wild but warm in his face that makes you know that here is an exciting, explosive new screen personality.
Fear Strikes Out told the story of Boston Red Sox outfielder Jimmy Pearsall, who suffered a nervous breakdown, partly because of pressure from his domineering father, played by Carl Malden.
You want to call you Yeller? Well, if that's what you want, you're no son of mine then.
Now he had a problem. I don't think he ever played baseball in his life. And they hired, I think it was a famous outfielder called Tommy Holmes to teach him how to throw the ball like a professional ball player and how to stand to the plate. And it wasn't an easy task for him. Once he got into the psychiatric part of it, I thought he was damn good.
The film earned excellent reviews and confirmed Tony's promise as one of the brightest talents of his generation. In 1957, at the height of his success, Tony chose to do something risky. He went back to Broadway to star in a new play based on Thomas Wolfe's autobiographical novel, Look Homeward, Angel.
He was playing Tom Wolfe, and his brother Ben had died. And Act One ended with Tony on his knees, reaching up to heaven, as I remember, and saying, you know, whoever you are, be good to Ben tonight. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I mean, it was a stunning, stunning performance.
For his performance, Perkins was nominated for a Tony Award. As his career took off, Tony's mother Janet managed his finances, exactly as she had done for his father Osgood.
She never seemed to be judgmental of his friends or his lifestyle, and seemed to be always supportive of him, and in that sense as well, a very modern, up-to-date woman. They seem to have a different dynamic than most mothers and sons. They seem to be able to escape that and have a kind of a friendship.
Tony also cultivated the friendship of other women who acted as surrogate mothers. He lived with German-born photographer Helen Merrill in an apartment on West 56th Street.
It was sort of a railroad flat, filled with lots and lots of books and dark, overstuffed grandmother-type furniture. A place Norman Bates would have loved. Dark, not much sunlight. You could only get to Tony's bedroom by going through Helen's bedroom.
Merrill liked to take in much younger men, with whom she developed intense platonic friendships.
And she sort of took care of him, and I think he was very happy with that relationship. It wasn't demanding at all. He had his freedom to do what he wanted, and yet he always had a place to come where he wasn't alone.
When he was working in Hollywood, Tony also lived part of the time with another older woman, costume designer Dorothy Jenkins, whom he had met on Friendly Persuasion.
And it's very flattering to an older woman to have a younger man of such depth and intelligence devoted to you and attached to you. And it could be very flattering. I know it must have been very flattering for my mother, because Tony was no slouch.
At the same time that his acting career was thriving, Tony pursued his interest in music. He released 4 albums and even had a few hit songs. In New York, he made plans to star in his first Broadway musical, Green Willow, written by Frank Lesser, the legendary composer of Guys and Dolls. At the same time, he made movies back-to-back. Paramount was grooming him to be one of the top stars of the era. The studio set Tony up with many young starlets and made sure to photograph him out on the town.
Never, never will I marry. Never, never will I wed.
The reality of his life in the 1950s was different from the picture painted by the studio publicists. In 1959, at a party in New York, Tony met a young Columbia student named Alan Helms.
So he was a hot movie star, and he was also beautiful, and he had the widest shoulders I've ever seen and the smoothest skin I've ever touched. We began an affair, very private. I think he was the most tormented person about his sexuality I've ever known. And I think if Tony could have taken a pill when he went to bed and gotten up the next morning straight, he absolutely would have done it. I don't think his being gay brought him very much pleasure, except the kind of excitement that comes with doing forbidden things.
Popular Anthony Perkins, as confident singing a love song as he is fighting for his life.
Meanwhile, Hollywood's attempts to merchandise Perkins as a romantic leading man did not succeed. After Fear Strikes Out, all of his films over the next 3 years were box office flops.
I think we could progress to the second stage of our relationship.
Like what?
Like a reasonably long engagement.
He needed another break, and he got it in 1959, when Alfred Hitchcock tagged him for the lead in a low-budget thriller.
The murderer, you see, crept in here very slowly. Of course, the shower was on, there was no sound, and
boy, it's stuffy in here. Well, the mattress is soft, and there's hangers in the closet, and stationery with Bates Motel printed on it in case you want to make your friends back home feel envious. And the, over there.
The bathroom.
Yeah. Well, if you want anything, just tap on the wall. I'll be in the office.
Thank you, Mr. Bates.
Norman Bates.
Tony brought to Norman, depths that I don't think any writer could even imagine. He gave Norman even wit, humor.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
I really didn't know very much about Tony. You could talk with Tony for 45 minutes on the set in deep conversation without ever really finding out anything about him. I think he had the great talent to preserve himself that Norman Bates had.
You know what I think? I think that we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever get out. We scratch and claw, but only at the air, only at each other. And for all of it, we never budge an inch.
Sometimes we deliberately step into those traps.
I was born in mine. I don't mind it anymore.
Oh, but you should. You should mind it.
Oh, I do. But I say I don't.
The movie's impact had surprised even its creators. Psycho was the highest-grossing film of 1960 and one of the most profitable movies of all time. It cost $800,000 and ended up grossing more than $20 million. When Psycho opened in Europe, Perkins was there working on another film.
So he was shooting in Paris, and outside of the theater, he'd wait till the theater emptied, and then he'd jump out, from the shadows as Norman, going like, or as Mother, going, ah! And people would go bananas.
From the start of his career, Tony had most often been cast as a hypersensitive, troubled misfit. The enormous success of Psycho cemented that image and locked him in a mold that he would have trouble escaping.
My wife helped me with that. She said, all the people that come around and talk to you about Psycho, if you shy back from them, and if you give them the impression that you've heard this before, and that these references to you in the film annoy you, and that put you off, they go away from that encounter believing that you are like the part. Why don't you just give in to it? Why don't you just succumb to it and say, well, thank you for liking me in that role, but that's not really me.
Psycho had a way of doing wonderful things for everybody connected with it. It also did awful things for people connected with it. It changed lives in a way. It seemed like the audiences saw Tony in this role and never really wanted him in anything else.
Right after Psycho, and after the disappointing failure of Green Willow on Broadway, Tony went to Europe to make a number of romantic films, often with voluptuous screen goddesses. For his performance as Ingrid Bergman's young lover in Goodbye Again, Tony won the Best Actor award at the 1961 Cannes Film Festival. Many of his co-stars were infatuated with him, but Tony spurned their romantic overtures.
It's funny to say this, but women loved him. He treated women beautifully, had a kind of courtliness, which is almost gone. I mean, he would open the door, and he would pull your chair, and he would... a politeness. And I'm sure Janet, his mother, had a great deal to do with that. I'm sure he was a very well-brought-up boy. Very strict mother.
For this man, she sacrificed everything. Religion, honor, respect, affection.
He was a big American star then, enormous, and European movies were very intent upon getting American stars. First of all, it helped guarantee a release in the United States, and also because of box office in Europe. And I felt that he was used to a great extent.
Why am I always in the wrong without even knowing what for or what it's all about?
Some of these European films, however, were extraordinarily ambitious undertakings, like Orson Welles' film of Franz Kafka's novel, The Trial.
There was a thing about Tony, too, that always struck me and impressed me, and that was that he seemed always to be in search of challenge, like a willingness to keep expanding the perimeters of his own experience as an artist.
What do you think?
I think you're crazy.
Maybe you're right. That would certainly explain.
Even if his movies failed to connect with audiences, Tony's performances continued to win accolades. Pauline Kael, the most respected American critic of the period, said that his performance in 1968's Pretty Poison was the best of his career.
You mean all the things in the letter were true?
What?
What, setting fire to your aunt's house and burning her up alive? Is that true?
Joanne, wait a second. I didn't know she was in that house. I swear I didn't. She had been playing with some girl next door. Playing doctor or something. Her name was Ursula. And my aunt caught us. It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. And my aunt beat me with a pile of sticks. So I took that pile of sticks into the cellar and I set fire to them soon. But I thought my aunt was out. That poor fool, she sneaked back into the house after she told me she was going out. I guess she hoped to catch me committing lascivious carriage or something, but I didn't know it, Suanne. I didn't know she was in the house. You see? You see?
Pretty Poison, like all of Tony's movies of the period, failed at the box office, and the industry began to question his commercial appeal. Rumors of his homosexuality may also have hurt his standing, though similar rumors had not hampered the career of another closeted gay actor of the era.
Rock Hudson seemed to have an easy, open personality and a warm masculinity he exuded. Tony Perkins didn't exude warmth or physically that kind of masculinity, even though he worked out and had a very strong body, which, by the way, he used to like to display. He made sure that, even in Look Homeward Angel, I think he sort of maneuvered it with the director that he would take his shirt off in one scene, because he had a good body, he liked it.
In 1969, Tony joined the all-star cast for the film version of Joseph Heller's anti-war novel, Catch-22. The company was stranded on location in Mexico for months, and the movie went millions of dollars over budget. For Perkins, the experience proved to be an important turning point.
Where I found myself stranded for a long time with a group of people. There was no place to go, nothing to do, only coexist with others. And I couldn't do it well. I didn't. So I got off the phone and called the shrink.
Tony had been in analysis before, but the therapist he chose this time was a New York analyst named Mildred Newman. In their best-selling self-help manual, Mildred Newman and her husband Bernard Berkowitz wrote, "Analysts once thought they had little chance of changing homosexuals' preferences. But we found that a homosexual who really wants to change has a very good chance of doing so. Now, we're hearing all kinds of success stories."
The predominant opinion was that homosexuality was a disease. It was a category in the diagnostic manual. It was pathological, and it was something to be cured, something to be changed.
Mildred Newman resolved to make Tony Perkins one of her success stories. During a break from therapy, Perkins went to Texas to make a movie for director Sidney Lumet. The two began discussing their experiences in psychoanalysis, and Lumet asked Tony why he had gone into therapy.
I said, "What about you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm homosexual." And I tried not to do that, but I was completely surprised. And from then on, and he spoke about it completely openly. And I remember we were waiting at the airport, and he said that period of his life was over with. And I said, "Well, how come, Tony? How did it happen?" He said, "I just didn't want it anymore."
By the late 1960s, Anthony Perkins had achieved many of his ambitions as an actor, but personal contentment eluded him. Over the next several years, he had daily therapy sessions with Mildred Newman, who often urged her gay patients to adopt a heterosexual lifestyle.
The whole idea of my relationship with women was heated subject. I was pretty naive about all relationships, which is why I went in the first place, but relationships with women was something that I didn't feel that I was ever going to get straight or really cared to.
I shall pray for you, Bean. This land abounds in ruffians and varlets. Their numbers are legion, their evil skills commensurate.
In 1972, while filming The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, the 40-year-old Perkins had his first heterosexual experience with co-star Victoria Principal. On Play It As It Lays, based on Joan Didion's acclaimed novel, Tony played a gay Hollywood producer. The role coincided with a major change in his life. At a party held for some members of the cast and crew, Perkins met a 24-year-old photographer named Barry Berenson.
She seemed to be
such a warm, she was with all of us, a very warm, effusive personality. And you couldn't help smile around her, and she obviously brought that out in him.
Barry had always been infatuated with Tony Perkins. As a teenager, she had kept a scrapbook filled with his pictures. Shortly after they met, Barry interviewed and photographed Tony for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine. What developed after that surprised Tony's closest friends.
This was a journey that I think was as surprising to him as it was to everybody else, but the moment that I met his future wife, I realized that these two people were meant to be together.
On August 9th, 1973, 41-year-old Tony married 25-year-old Barry in a private ceremony on Cape Cod. The wedding was attended by only a few friends and family members, including Tony's mother, Janet. Barry was already 3 months pregnant with their first son, Osgood. A second son, Elvis, was born 2 years later.
Tony took to fatherhood like a fish to water. He just, the whole process of it was just fascinating to him, and he loved it so much. I think through Barry, and possibly through having the boys, he got a great bit of his youth back too.
At the same time his personal life changed, Perkins branched out professionally. He and composer Stephen Sondheim wrote a screenplay based on their love of murder mystery games.
What's the game?
Well, the idea is to discover everybody's secret.
The Last of Sheila, about a murder game played by a number of jaded Hollywood types aboard a yacht, gave Tony the chance to satirize the industry he knew so well.
I shouldn't say cynical, but he had a viewpoint about people in general, and he did not attribute the best motives to most people. Later on, he mellowed out and was much kinder, more sympathetic to people's foibles. But at that point, he wasn't motivated by anger at all. He just was really sharp, Tony, and very intelligent.
The New York Times praised the Perkins-Sondheim script as a dazzling achievement. But The Last of Sheila fared poorly at the box office, and Tony never had another script produced.
This is no ordinary train. This is the legendary Orient Express.
The year after The Last of Sheila, Tony appeared in his first hit film in more than a decade.
Starring the greatest cast of suspicious characters ever involved in murder. Lauren Bacall, Sean Connery, John Gielgud, Anthony Perkins.
Seems like I'm kind of incriminating myself.
It was a collection of melodrama performances, and Tony had total delight working in with that kind of size to be created in the character.
Also in the 70s, Perkins returned to the theater. He replaced Anthony Hopkins in the acclaimed Broadway production of Equus, playing for 2 years the part of the troubled psychiatrist Martin Dysart.
In Equus, all of the actors were on the stage the whole time, actually sitting there. And when you weren't actually playing your part, you were watching, so you were terribly aware of the audience, more than you usually are in the theater. And they were mesmerized by him. They loved watching him.
In 1979, Tony starred on Broadway with Mia Farrow in romantic comedy, written by Bernard Slade, the author of Same Time Next Year.
Well, the joke was, you know, we were going into New York with the actress from Rosemary's Baby and the man from Psycho, and we were doing a romantic comedy.
He liked to play games. That was my experience of him. He liked to play mental games and see what you were made of. For instance, I remember he said, "I've met your father, I worked with your father, and he's a wonderful actor and a very odd man." Eyes narrowing, and I wanted to say, well, if that isn't the pot calling the kettle black, you know, he just, wow, you know, it takes one to know one kind of thing.
I wouldn't say he was an exhibitionist, but he was certainly totally uninhibited. I mean, I had very few conversations with Tony that when he wasn't nude. He would have ideas that were quite outlandish, and we all figured it was because he was smoking something strong at night.
Suspicions of his drug use were confirmed when Tony was arrested on 2 separate occasions for possession of marijuana and LSD.
Imperfections of a man in the public eye will always be under closer scrutiny than the imperfections of the man on the street.
His wife was endlessly understanding.
Barry also was an incredible, this sounds funny, but she was an incredible homemaker. She made the most amazing home for him and the kids and for the extended family that they were so generous to include.
At the same time, his co-workers saw evidence of a double life that continued after his marriage.
I don't know what he was doing with young boys between shows in those rooms, right? But we knew that Barry was coming to have dinner afterwards, and we were amazed that he could turn it on and turn it off that quickly.
He was this loving, caring father and husband who you would never think would ultimately, once they left, would become a completely different person. I would be surprised if his wife, Barry, didn't know what was happening. I think that was maybe an agreement they had. It had to have been, because he was so out on the set, anybody could have gone to her and said something.
Perkins also relished the opportunity to take professional chances. In Ken Russell's Crimes of Passion, he played a repressed preacher set on curing Kathleen Turner of her evil ways. Tony had high hopes for the film, but it was heavily censored and never did find an audience.
We both bemoan the fact that the film had to be cut severely from Ken Russell's original cut, which was rated X 5 times by the ratings board. And Tony and I would always bemoan that fact. We felt it really emasculated the film.
Aside from Crimes of Passion, most of Perkins' movies during the late 70s and 80s were utterly routine. In Hollywood, his opportunities were dwindling. His career at a low ebb, Perkins decided to bring back a familiar character. Since the enormous success of Psycho in 1960, Anthony Perkins had tried to distance himself from the character of Norman Bates, refusing all offers to make another horror film. But in 1982, with his movie career floundering, he agreed to reprise his most famous role for Psycho 2. The movie was a hit, and the studio quickly set in motion Psycho 3, this time hiring Perkins to direct as well as star.
The past is never really past. It stays with me all the time. And no matter how hard I try, I can't really escape. It's always there, throbbing inside you, coloring your perceptions of the world and sometimes controlling them.
The novelty had worn off, and the film bombed at the box office.
He decided to branch off into directing at a time that, it was very hard for a first-time director to get a shot. Once you took that shot and the film didn't gross a lot of money, you often didn't get a second shot. So, indeed, that could have been frustrating to him.
With his directing ambitions nipped in the bud, Perkins returned to acting, most often in horror films. He seemed resigned to accepting his role as the perennial Norman Bates.
The Psycho films, in fact, were responsible for my ongoing identifiability. This first sequel and the subsequent sequels, I think, have kept me in the public eye, so I have nothing to complain about.
In 1990, he signed to do Psycho 4, this time working with the writer of the original Psycho, Joseph Stefano, whom he hadn't seen in 30 years.
Tony changed in ways that I thought were unhappy ways. I felt that he had lost some of his security within himself.
By that time, he was beginning to experience health problems. In March of 1990, the National Enquirer ran a story saying that he was HIV positive.
Because of an unscrupulous employee at dermatologist, Tony was being treated for Bell's palsy, and without him knowing, they submitted his blood to a blood test for HIV. It came back positive. They never told him that, and the person sold it to the tabloids.
The Enquirer's story prompted Tony to have himself tested for the AIDS virus, and the test confirmed that he was HIV positive. His family rallied around him during his illness. When he had to go to the hospital, Perkins used an assumed name. He was terrified that if the studios learned of his condition, they would blackball him. He turned for counsel to Marianne Williamson, a minister who gave lectures attended by many AIDS patients and Hollywood celebrities.
Tony was at a point in his life where spiritual matters were important to him. But when illness and the accompanying grief, trauma in his life set in, spiritual matters became a primary coping issue for him.
Tony worked with many AIDS charities, including one that Williamson headed, Project Angel Food. But for 2 years, he kept his condition a secret until his health began to deteriorate visibly.
There is a time for secrets, and there's a time for letting go of those secrets. And I think between him and his wife, they knew the right time to finally do that. I think he was overjoyed and a bit surprised at the love that came to him from a lot of different people.
It could not have been easy because obviously there were an awful lot of people who knew nothing about his sexual taste, and to be dying of AIDS clearly revealed all that. But it wasn't the shrinking violet.
In April of 1992, Barry decided to hold a surprise party in New York to celebrate Tony's 60th birthday.
I think the sense of everyone there was that it was a farewell. I don't think that there was much confusion about that. But having said that, it was a happy night. I mean, there was a lot of affection and a lot of hugging. And
as his condition worsened, Tony focused on his family.
Like any parent who dies before their time, he grieved the thought that he wasn't going to be there for his sons as they matured. But I told him that they had him as long as they needed him, that the essence of who he was had already penetrated their being.
One of the greatest things that I witnessed in the endgame of Tony's life was the kind of wonderful passing that his wife Barry provided for him. She just made sure that he was surrounded by people that he loved, that he was in his home, that it was filled with things that were familiar to him.
Anthony Perkins died on September 12, 1992. He was 60 years old.
The memorial service was very inspirational because it was, there was so much love in that room. There was so much caring in the room. And even though it was sad, there was just such love and celebration of a life. And I think that's the way it should be.
His final illness had brought him a greater sense of self-acceptance than he had known during his 4 decades as a Hollywood celebrity. After his death, his sons released a statement that Tony had prepared. He said, "I have learned more about love, selflessness, and human understanding from the people I have met in this great adventure in the world of AIDS than I ever did in the cutthroat, competitive world in which I spent my life."